The crystal spires of the Draconic Empire stretched toward 3 crimson suns, their surfaces gleaming like scales in the eternal twilight of Pyrrhos Prime. Within the highest tower of the Imperial Palace, Emperor Vorthak the Eternal brooded over reports from across his vast domain. His massive form, covered in obsidian scales that shimmered with inner fire, dominated the throne room where lesser beings trembled in his presence. The Draconic Empire ruled over 47 star systems, each populated by species that had learned to bow before the superior might of the dragonkin. For 3 millennia, no force had challenged their dominance. Their warriors were legends, their technology was supreme, and their magic was unmatched. The very mention of their name sent shivers through the spines of galactic councils. Yet in the deepest chambers of the palace, in rooms where even the boldest courtiers feared to venture, lay a secret that could shatter the Empire's reputation. Prince Zephyros, the Emperor's youngest son and heir to the throne, was dying. The prince was nothing like his father or elder brothers. Where they possessed scales like armor and breathed fire that could melt starship hulls, Zephyros was small and frail. His scales were pale silver instead of the traditional obsidian, and his fire barely managed to light a candle. Most damning of all, he suffered from a mysterious wasting disease that left him bedridden for days at a time, burning with fever that no imperial physician could cure. "The boy is an embarrassment," hissed General Kazarak, the Emperor's chief military advisor, as he paced before the throne. His own scales were scarred from countless battles, and his amber eyes glowed with contempt. "Word of his weakness spreads through the palace like poison. How can the Empire respect an heir who cannot even stand for a full day?" Emperor Vorthak's claws scraped against the armrests of his throne, leaving deep grooves in the reinforced crystal. "He is my blood," the Emperor rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "The bloodline must continue." "Then perhaps it is time to consider alternatives," General Kazarak suggested carefully. "Prince Drakon has proven himself in battle. Prince Typhon commands respect from the fleet commanders. Either would make a worthy heir." The Emperor's eyes flared with inner fire. "You forget yourself, General. Zephyros is the youngest, but he is also the most intelligent. His strategic mind surpasses even mine. When he recovers—" "If he recovers," Kazarak interrupted, then immediately bowed low as the Emperor's rage filled the room with heat. "Forgive me, my lord, but the doctors say his condition worsens with each passing cycle." In the medical wing of the palace, Dr. Nexus, the Empire's most renowned healer, was examining the prince once again. The young dragon lay motionless on a bed carved from a single piece of rare moonstone, his breathing shallow and labored. His silver scales had lost their luster, and his normally bright blue eyes were dim with exhaustion. "Any change?" asked Lady Seraphina, the prince's personal attendant, her own elegant features marked with worry. Dr. Nexus shook his reptilian head, his medical instruments registering the same hopeless readings. "The fever continues to spike unpredictably. His magic reserves are almost completely depleted. I fear we may lose him before the next moon cycle." Lady Seraphina wrung her hands, her voice barely a whisper. "What about the treatments from the Healers Guild on Medicus 7? The crystal therapy from the ethereal monks?" "All tried, all failed," Dr. Nexus replied grimly. "This disease is unlike anything in our medical databases. It seems to specifically target the magical essence that flows through draconic bloodlines. Without it, he cannot maintain his body temperature, his immunity fails, and his organs begin to shut down." Unknown to either of them, someone else had been listening to these conversations with growing concern. Marcus Chen, a human who worked as a maintenance custodian in the palace, had access to areas that most beings never saw. His small stature and unremarkable appearance made him nearly invisible to the draconic nobles, who barely acknowledged the existence of lesser species serving in their palace. Marcus had been working in the Imperial Palace for 2 years, ever since the Terran Federation had negotiated a cultural exchange program with the Draconic Empire. The program was supposed to promote understanding between species, but in reality it was little more than a way for the Empire to demonstrate their superiority by having members of other species serve them. Most humans in the program were assigned to menial tasks, and Marcus was no exception. He cleaned corridors, maintained environmental systems, and repaired equipment that the dragons considered beneath their notice. But Marcus was not what he appeared to be. Before coming to Pyros Prime, he had been Dr. Marcus Chen, a xenobiologist and physician who specialized in cross-species medicine. He had volunteered for the custodial position specifically to study draconic physiology from within their society. What he had discovered over the past 2 years had fascinated him, but nothing had captured his attention like the mysterious illness affecting Prince Zephyros. Working in the palace's service tunnels gave Marcus access to the medical wing's ventilation systems, and he had overheard enough conversations to understand the severity of the prince's condition. More importantly, he had observed the prince during his brief moments of consciousness, noting symptoms that the draconic doctors seemed to be missing entirely. The problem, Marcus realized, was that draconic medicine was focused entirely on magical solutions. Their doctors could manipulate life energy, accelerate healing through crystal therapy, and even transfer vitality from one being to another. But they had never encountered a disease that was fundamentally biological rather than magical in nature. During his off-duty hours, Marcus had been conducting his own research using a small, concealed medical scanner that he had smuggled into the palace. The device was designed to analyze biological samples and cross-reference them with known pathogens in the Terran medical database. What he had discovered in the air samples from the medical wing had shocked him. The prince wasn't suffering from a magical disease at all. He was infected with a microscopic parasite that was completely unknown to draconic science. The parasite was feeding on the magical energy that flowed through the prince's body, gradually depleting his reserves while reproducing at an exponential rate. Without magical energy to sustain his immune system, the prince's body was slowly shutting down. The worst part was that the disease was likely transmitted through the air, which meant it could potentially spread to other members of the royal family or even throughout the palace. The draconic doctors were so focused on treating the symptoms with magic that they never considered the possibility of a purely biological cause. Marcus faced a terrible dilemma. His medical knowledge could potentially save the prince's life, but revealing his true identity would expose him as a spy and likely result in his execution. The cultural exchange program was barely tolerated by many dragons who viewed other species as inherently inferior. A human claiming to possess medical knowledge superior to that of the Empire's greatest doctors would be seen as the ultimate insult. Yet as he watched the young prince growing weaker each day, Marcus found it increasingly difficult to remain silent. There was something about Zephyros that reminded him of patients he had treated during his years practicing medicine on Earth. Despite his royal status and draconic heritage, the prince was still just a sick child who needed help. The decision came to a head on a night when the palace was shaken by alarms. Marcus was working late in the environmental control room when he heard the commotion echoing through the corridors. Through the security monitors, he could see guards and medical personnel rushing toward the medical wing. Prince Zephyros had taken a turn for the worse. His fever had spiked beyond anything previously recorded, and his breathing had become so shallow that the medical sensors could barely detect it. Dr. Nexus was frantically trying every treatment in his arsenal, but nothing was working. Marcus watched through the ventilation grates as Emperor Vorthak himself arrived in the medical wing, his massive form filling the doorway. The Emperor's rage and desperation were palpable as he demanded answers that Dr. Nexus could not provide. "You are the greatest healer in the Empire," the Emperor roared, his voice shaking the walls. "You have restored warriors from the brink of death, regrown severed limbs, even brought back those whose hearts had stopped beating. How can you be defeated by a child's fever?" Dr. Nexus prostrated himself before the Emperor, his voice trembling. "My lord, I have exhausted every technique known to our science. The boy's condition is beyond my understanding. Perhaps if we contacted the Ethereal Council on Mysticus Prime or the ancient healers of—" "There is no time," the Emperor thundered. "He is dying now, tonight. You will save him, or I will hold you personally responsible for the death of my heir." Marcus could see the terror in Dr. Nexus's eyes as the physician turned back to his patient with renewed desperation. The doctor began channeling massive amounts of healing energy into the prince, trying to force his body to respond through sheer magical power. But Marcus could see on his concealed scanner that the parasites were actually feeding on the increased energy, reproducing even faster than before. The treatment was killing the prince. In that moment, Marcus made his decision. He could not stand by and watch a child die when he possessed the knowledge to save him. Whatever the consequences might be, his oath as a physician demanded that he act. Moving swiftly through the service tunnels, Marcus made his way to the medical wing's main entrance. The guards at the door were focused on the drama unfolding inside and barely glanced at the human custodian as he approached. "Excuse me," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible over the Emperor's continued demands for results. "I need to speak with Dr. Nexus about a maintenance issue in the medical equipment." The guard waved him away dismissively. "Not now, human. Can't you see we're dealing with a crisis?" Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would change everything. "The crisis is exactly why I need to speak with him. I believe I know what's wrong with the prince." The guard's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with suspicion. "You? A custodian? You dare to suggest that you know something that the Empire's greatest healer does not?" "I don't dare," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "But the prince is dying, and I may be his only chance." The guard might have struck Marcus down for his presumption, but at that moment, a new alarm began sounding from within the medical chamber. The prince's vital signs were crashing, and even the Emperor's voice had fallen silent in the face of his son's impending death. Perhaps it was desperation, or perhaps some small part of the guard recognized the sincerity in Marcus's voice, but instead of calling for security, he stepped aside. "If you are wrong," the guard growled, "if this is some kind of trick or delusion, the Emperor will have you fed to the flame worms." "I understand," Marcus nodded, and stepped into the chamber where the fate of the Draconic Empire's heir hung in the balance. The medical chamber fell into stunned silence as the small human entered. Emperor Vorthak's massive head turned toward Marcus, his eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and desperation that could have incinerated lesser beings on the spot. "What is the meaning of this?" the Emperor demanded, his voice a low rumble that made the crystal walls vibrate. "How dare a servant interrupt?" "Your Majesty," Marcus interrupted, dropping to one knee in the traditional sign of respect, but keeping his eyes raised to meet the Emperor's gaze. "I believe I can save your son." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Nexus stared at Marcus in horrified disbelief, while Lady Seraphina covered her mouth with her hands. Even the medical assistants stopped their frantic work to stare at the audacious human. Emperor Vorthak's scales began to glow with inner fire, a sure sign that his legendary temper was about to explode. "You presume to possess knowledge that surpasses the greatest minds in the Empire? You, a lowly custodian from a primitive world?" Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead, but he forced himself to speak calmly. "I presume nothing, Your Majesty. but I have observed symptoms that your doctors may not have considered, and I believe the prince's condition has a cause that lies outside traditional draconic medicine." "Impossible," Dr. Nexus sputtered, his professional pride stung. "I have diagnosed and treated every known ailment that can affect the draconic species. This human knows nothing of our physiology, our magical nature." "Which is precisely why I might see what you cannot," Marcus interrupted gently. "Your medicine is based on magical principles, but what if this disease operates on purely biological mechanisms? What if it's something that feeds on magic rather than being caused by magical imbalance?" The Emperor's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Explain yourself, human. And know that if you waste precious moments of my son's life with foolish theories, I will make your death a legend of suffering that will echo through the ages." Marcus rose to his feet, his decision made. There was no going back now. "My name is Dr. Marcus Chen. I am a xenobiologist and physician from Earth. I came to your palace under false pretenses to study draconic physiology, and in doing so, I believe I have identified the true cause of Prince Zephyros's illness." The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Guards reached for their weapons, and Dr. Nexus stepped back as if Marcus had suddenly become venomous. But Emperor Vorthak raised a massive claw, stopping any immediate action. "A spy," the Emperor said slowly, his voice deadly calm. "You admit to being a spy in my own palace." "I admit to being a scientist," Marcus replied firmly. "One who has taken an oath to preserve life wherever possible. Your son is dying from a parasitic infection that is completely unknown to your medical science. The parasites are microscopic organisms that feed on magical energy, which is why your treatments have been ineffective. In fact, the magical healing energy you've been channeling into him has been feeding the parasites, making his condition worse." Dr. Nexus stepped forward, his voice shaking with indignation. "Preposterous! There are no such parasites in our medical databases. We have studied every form of life that could possibly affect draconic physiology." "But you haven't studied life forms that exist purely in biological dimensions," Marcus interrupted. "These parasites don't interact with magic directly. They consume it as a food source. That's why your magical scanners can't detect them, and why your energy-based treatments are accelerating the infection." Marcus reached slowly into his maintenance pouch, moving carefully so as not to alarm the guards. "I have a biological scanner that can prove what I'm saying. With your permission, I can show you the parasites that are killing your son." The Emperor stared at Marcus for a long moment, and in that silence, the only sound was the labored breathing of the dying prince. Finally, the Emperor nodded once. "Show me." Marcus activated his concealed medical scanner and approached the prince's bedside. The device immediately began registering massive levels of parasitic activity, far worse than his earlier readings had indicated. The infection had spread throughout the prince's system, and the recent magical treatments had caused the parasite population to explode exponentially. "Here," Marcus said, holding the scanner where everyone could see its display. "These readings show millions of microscopic organisms throughout the prince's bloodstream and organs. They're feeding on his magical essence and reproducing at an incredible rate. At this level of infection, he has perhaps an hour before complete system failure." Dr. Nexus examined the scanner's display, his expression shifting from skepticism to horror as he realized the implications. "But even if such organisms exist, how could they have infected the prince? Our palace is sealed against all known biological threats." "The parasites are airborne in their initial stage," Marcus explained. "They likely came from an off-world visitor or cargo shipment. Once they enter a host with magical abilities, they transform into the energy-feeding form that we're seeing now. The prince's powerful magical bloodline made him an ideal host, but his young age and relatively weak constitution left him vulnerable to the infection." Emperor Vorthak leaned closer to his son, his massive form casting shadows across the bed. If what you say is true, can you cure him? Marcus hesitated, knowing that his answer would determine not only the prince's fate, but his own. The treatment exists, but it's risky. The parasites have to be eliminated using biological agents, specifically targeted antibiotics that will destroy them without harming the host. But the treatment will temporarily suppress the prince's magical abilities while his system recovers. For a member of your royal bloodline, this could be seen as a fate worse than death. The emperor's eyes flared with renewed anger. You would strip my son of his magical heritage? Temporarily, Marcus emphasized. The suppression would last perhaps a month while the antibiotics work and his body rebuilds its natural defenses. Without treatment, he will die tonight. With treatment, he can recover completely, but there will be a period where he is essentially a normal, non-magical being. The chamber fell silent except for the increasingly irregular beeping of the medical monitors. Prince Zephyros's breathing had become so shallow that his chest barely moved and his silver scales had lost almost all their color. Lady Seraphina stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. Your Majesty, if there is any chance to save him... Dr. Nexus looked torn between professional pride and genuine concern for his patient. My lord, I cannot recommend trusting the word of an admitted spy. The risk is that my son dies, the Emperor cut him off. His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, but the pain in it was unmistakable. Dr. Chen. He pronounced the name carefully, acknowledging Marcus's true identity for the first time. If I allow this treatment, what assurance do I have that you are not attempting to poison my heir? Marcus met the Emperor's gaze directly. You have my word as a physician, and you have logic. If I wanted to harm the prince, I could have remained silent and let the disease run its course. Instead, I'm risking my life to save him. More importantly, you can monitor every aspect of the treatment. If the parasites don't begin dying within the first hour, you can stop the process and execute me immediately. The Emperor looked down at his son, his expression showing a vulnerability that few beings had ever witnessed. Prince Zephyros was clearly dying, his life force ebbing away with each passing moment. All the power and technology of the greatest empire in the galaxy could not save him. What do you need? The Emperor asked quietly. Marcus felt a surge of relief mixed with terror. He was committed now, and failure would mean not only the death of the prince, but almost certainly his own execution as well. I need access to your pharmaceutical laboratory and permission to synthesize a specific antibiotic compound. The treatment will require precise dosing based on the prince's body mass and the level of infection. I'll also need continuous biological monitoring to track the parasite's response to treatment. Dr. Nexus stepped forward reluctantly. I will assist you, but I want it understood that I am doing so under protest. If this human's treatment harms the prince in any way, if the human's treatment fails, we will all share the consequences, the Emperor said grimly. But if it succeeds... He looked directly at Marcus, and for the first time, there was something other than anger in his eyes. Proceed, Dr. Chen. Save my son. As Marcus began preparing for the most important medical procedure of his life, he could not have known that his actions would soon reshape the relationship between humanity and the most powerful empire in the galaxy. The treatment of one sick child was about to demonstrate that sometimes the greatest strength came not from magic or technology, but from knowledge, compassion, and the willingness to risk everything to save a life. The pharmaceutical laboratory of the Imperial Palace was a marvel of draconic technology, featuring equipment that could synthesize compounds at the molecular level using a combination of advanced chemistry and magical enhancement. Marcus stood before the primary synthesis unit, his hands steady despite the enormity of what he was attempting. Behind him, Emperor Vorthak waited with the barely contained patience of a dormant volcano. Dr. Nexus hovered nearby, monitoring every move Marcus made with a mixture of professional curiosity and deep skepticism. Guards flanked the doorway, their weapons ready should the human prove to be anything other than what he claimed. "The compound I need to synthesize is called Spectinomycin 7, Marcus explained as he worked, knowing that transparency was his only protection now. "It's an antibiotic that targets the specific cellular structure of the parasites without affecting draconic physiology. The original human version wouldn't work on your son's biology, but I can modify the molecular structure to be compatible with his genetic makeup." Dr. Nexus leaned closer, studying the formulation that appeared on the synthesis unit's display. "I've never seen anything like this compound in our medical databases. How can you be certain it won't cause adverse reactions?" Marcus paused in his work, understanding the weight of the question. "During my time in the palace, I've been analyzing tissue samples from the air filtration systems where draconic personnel work. I've built a comprehensive model of your species' biological processes. The modified antibiotic will target the parasite's reproductive cycle without interfering with magical energy pathways." The synthesis process required precise timing and measurements that left no room for error. Marcus had to account for the prince's age, his weakened condition, and the massive parasite load that was destroying his system. Too little antibiotic would be ineffective, but too much could overwhelm the prince's already compromised physiology. As the synthesis neared completion, alarms began sounding from the medical wing. Lady Seraphina's voice echoed through the communication system, tight with panic. "Your Majesty, the prince's condition is deteriorating rapidly. His heart rate is becoming irregular and his breathing—" Her voice broke. "Dr. Nexus, please hurry!" Emperor Vorthak's claws scraped against the laboratory walls, leaving deep gouges in the reinforced metal. "How much longer?" he demanded. 30 seconds for synthesis, then 5 minutes to verify purity and dosage," Marcus replied, his voice remaining calm despite his racing pulse. "The verification is crucial. One miscalculation could be fatal." "My son may not have 5 minutes," the Emperor growled. Marcus met the Emperor's fiery gaze directly. "Your Majesty, I understand your desperation, but rushing the verification process could turn a life-saving treatment into a poison. Trust me to do this correctly, or your son will die regardless." The synthesis unit chimed softly as it completed the compound production. Marcus immediately began the verification process, running the finished product through a series of tests that seemed to take an eternity. Each reading had to be perfect: molecular stability, purity levels, biocompatibility markers. Dr. Nexus watched the readouts with growing amazement. "The compound structure is unlike anything in our pharmacology, but the theoretical interactions with draconic biology are elegant. How did you develop such precise knowledge of our physiology?" 2 years of careful observation and analysis," Marcus replied without taking his eyes off the verification process. "Your species' biological processes are remarkably stable compared to most others I've studied. Once I understood the baseline parameters, it became possible to predict how foreign substances would interact with your systems." The verification completed with all parameters showing green. Marcus carefully loaded the antibiotic into a medical injection system, calculating the precise dosage based on the prince's current weight and condition. "The treatment is ready," he announced, "but I need to explain exactly what will happen. The antibiotic will begin destroying the parasites within minutes, but as they die, they'll release toxins that could cause temporary worsening of symptoms. The prince's fever may spike even higher before it begins to fall. His magical abilities will be completely suppressed for several weeks while his system rebuilds." Emperor Vorthak nodded grimly. "Proceed." They rushed back to the medical wing, where Prince Zephyros lay motionless on his crystalline bed. His breathing had become so shallow that the medical monitors could barely detect it, and his skin had taken on an alarming translucent quality. Marcus approached the bedside, hypodermic injector in hand. Your Majesty, I need you to understand that the next few hours will be critical. The treatment will either save your son's life or—" He left the alternative unspoken. "I understand," the Emperor replied. "Do what must be done." Marcus carefully inserted the injection port into one of the prince's blood vessels, a procedure made more difficult by the young dragon's weakened condition. As the antibiotic entered his bloodstream, Marcus began a continuous monitoring process using his biological scanner. For the first 10 minutes, nothing seemed to happen. The prince's condition remained unchanged, and Marcus could see doubt growing in the eyes of everyone watching. Then his scanner began registering the first signs of parasite die-off. "It's working," Marcus announced quietly. "The parasites are beginning to respond to the treatment. Their reproductive rate is slowing, and I'm detecting cellular breakdown in the adult organisms." But even as he spoke, Prince Zephyros's condition seemed to worsen. His fever spiked to levels that would have been fatal for most species, and his breathing became even more labored. The dying parasites were indeed releasing toxins, as Marcus had predicted. Dr. Nexus stepped forward, his training warring with his distrust of the humans' methods. "His vital signs are crashing. We need to intervene with magical healing." "No," Marcus said sharply, surprising everyone with his vehemence. "Any magical energy you channel into him right now will feed the remaining parasites and could reverse all the progress we've made. His body needs to fight through this phase naturally." Emperor Vorthok watched his son's struggling form, his massive hands clenched into fists. "How long will this continue?" "The toxin release should peak within the next hour, then begin to subside," Marcus explained, never taking his eyes off his scanner. "But, Your Majesty, there's something else you need to know. As the parasites die, we'll be able to see the full extent of the damage they've caused to his system. Some of it may be permanent." The Emperor's eyes blazed. "What kind of damage?" Marcus hesitated, then decided complete honesty was necessary. "The parasites have been feeding on his magical essence for months. Even after we eliminate them, it may take years for his magical abilities to return to normal levels. He may never be as powerful as your other sons." The chamber fell silent, except for the labored breathing of the prince and the soft beeping of medical monitors. Marcus could see the conflict in the Emperor's expression. Relief that his son might survive, mixed with despair at what this could mean for the imperial succession. "A weak heir to the throne of the most powerful empire in the galaxy." General Kazarak's words from earlier seemed to echo in the room, though the general himself was not present. Lady Seraphina moved to stand beside the prince's bed, her voice soft but firm. "He will still be alive, Your Majesty. Still intelligent, still compassionate. Perhaps strength is not only measured in magical power." As the hour passed, Marcus's predictions proved accurate. The prince's fever began to subside, his breathing became more regular, and the toxic readings on the scanner started to decline. More importantly, the parasite count was dropping rapidly as the antibiotic did its work. "The worst is over," Marcus announced with visible relief. "The parasites are dying faster than they can reproduce now. In another few hours, the infection should be completely eliminated." Dr. Nexus had been monitoring the prince with his own equipment, and his expression showed grudging amazement. "His vital signs are stabilizing. The fever is breaking. I have never seen anything like this." Emperor Vorthok leaned over his son's bed, his massive form casting protective shadows. "When will he awaken?" "Soon," Marcus replied. "His body has been fighting this infection for months, and the recent crisis depleted his remaining energy reserves. But now that the parasites are being eliminated, his natural healing processes can begin functioning again." As if responding to his father's presence, Prince Zephyros's eyes fluttered open. They were still dim with exhaustion, but they were clear and alert for the first time in weeks. His voice was barely a whisper as he spoke. "Father, I feel different." The fire inside me is gone. Emperor Vorthak's expression softened as he gently touched his son's forehead. The fire will return, my child. What matters is that you are alive. The prince's gaze moved around the room, taking in the assembled medical staff, the monitoring equipment, and finally settling on Marcus. You're the human who works in the maintenance section. I've seen you in the corridors. Marcus stepped forward and bowed respectfully. Your Highness, my name is Marcus Chen. I'm pleased to see you recovering. Prince Zephyros studied Marcus with an intelligence that seemed far older than his years. You saved my life, didn't you? I can remember fragments. The doctors couldn't help me, but you could. Your Highness is very perceptive, Marcus replied carefully. I was fortunate to have knowledge that proved useful in your particular situation. The prince attempted to sit up, but his weakened condition made the effort impossible. His father gently helped him lean back against his pillows. I can't feel my magic at all, the prince observed with remarkable calm for someone so young. Is it gone forever? Marcus exchanged glances with Dr. Nexus before answering. The treatment temporarily suppressed your magical abilities while your body recovers from the infection. They should return gradually over the coming months, though it may take time to reach your previous levels. Prince Zephyros was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled. Good. Perhaps now I can learn what it's like to be ordinary for a while. I've always wondered what that would feel like. His response shocked the adults in the room. In draconic culture, magical ability was everything. It determined social status, career opportunities, even personal worth. The idea that someone would welcome its absence was almost incomprehensible. Emperor Vorthak stared at his son with a mixture of pride and concern. Zephyros, you must understand that without your magical abilities— I understand perfectly, father, the prince interrupted gently. I won't be able to fight like Dracon or command fleets like Typhon. But perhaps I can learn other things that don't require magic. Dr. Chen here has just demonstrated that sometimes the most important knowledge comes from studying life itself, not manipulating magical forces. Marcus felt a surge of respect for the young prince's maturity and wisdom. Despite his royal upbringing and the cultural pressures surrounding him, Zephyros seemed genuinely curious about alternatives to the traditional draconic path. Dr. Nexus stepped forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional admiration. Dr. Chen, I owe you an apology. Your methods were completely outside my experience, but they have achieved what all of our traditional techniques could not. I would be honored to learn more about this biological approach to medicine. Marcus nodded graciously. I would be equally honored to share what I know, Dr. Nexus. Perhaps together we can develop treatments that combine the best of both our medical traditions. Emperor Vorthak had been silent throughout this exchange, his massive form still and contemplative. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying a weight that commanded attention from everyone present. Dr. Chen, you came to my palace as a spy. You deceived my guards, studied my people without permission, and misrepresented your true purpose. By the laws of the Empire, these actions carry a penalty of death. Marcus felt his heart sink. He had known this moment would come, but somehow he had hoped that saving the prince's life might earn him some consideration. However, the Emperor continued, you also risked your own life to save my son when you could have remained hidden. You demonstrated knowledge that our greatest doctors lacked, and you acted with the compassion of a true healer. These actions require a different response entirely. The Emperor rose to his full, imposing height, his scales glimmering with inner fire. Kneel, Dr. Marcus Chen of Earth. Marcus sank to one knee, uncertain whether he was about to be honored or executed. The Emperor's massive claw came to rest gently on his shoulder, and when the dragon spoke again, his voice carried the formal cadence of imperial proclamation. By the ancient laws of the Draconic Empire, I name you Friend of the Crown and Healer to the Royal House. You are granted full citizenship in our realm, with all rights and protections thereof. Your deception is forgiven in recognition of the greater service you have rendered. The proclamation sent shockwaves through everyone present. Lady Seraphina gasped audibly. Dr. Nexus stepped back in amazement, and even the guards seemed stunned by the unprecedented honor being granted to an alien. Furthermore, the Emperor continued, I hereby establish a new position within the Imperial Medical Service, Chief of Biological Sciences. You will work alongside our traditional healers to develop new treatments that combine magical and biological approaches to medicine. Your findings regarding cross-species physiology will be invaluable as our empire continues to expand and interact with diverse populations. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the sudden transformation in his circumstances. From condemned spy to honored citizen in a matter of moments, it was almost impossible to process. Prince Zephyros spoke from his bed, his voice still weak but filled with enthusiasm. Father, I would like to request that Dr. Chen also serve as my personal tutor during my recovery. If I'm going to be without magic for several months, perhaps I can use that time to learn about the biological sciences that saved my life. The Emperor nodded approvingly. An excellent suggestion, my son. Dr. Chen, do you accept these appointments? Marcus rose to his feet, still somewhat dazed by the rapid turn of events. Your Majesty, I am deeply honored by your trust. I accept gladly, with the promise that I will serve the crown and the people of the empire to the best of my abilities. Excellent, the Emperor rumbled with satisfaction. Dr. Nexus, I want you to work closely with Dr. Chen to establish protocols for detecting and treating biological threats that our traditional methods might miss. This infection could have spread throughout the palace if it had gone undetected much longer. Dr. Nexus bowed deeply. It will be done, Your Majesty. I confess I am eager to learn more about these biological diagnostic techniques. As the immediate crisis passed and the various officials began discussing the practical arrangements for Marcus's new position, Prince Zephyros gestured for him to come closer. Dr. Chen, the prince said quietly, may I ask you something? Why did you really come here? I understand you're a scientist, but there must have been safer ways to study our people. Marcus considered the question carefully. Your Highness, I came here because I believed that understanding between our species was important for the future. The galaxy is becoming more interconnected every year, and I thought that by learning about draconic biology, I might be able to help bridge the gap between our medical traditions. I never expected to become involved in treating a member of your family. The prince nodded thoughtfully. And now, what do you hope to accomplish in your new role? I hope to ensure that no one else has to suffer from diseases that could be easily treated with the right knowledge, Marcus replied. Whether they're draconic, human, or any other species, medicine should transcend cultural barriers. Prince Zephyros smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness Marcus had seen from him. I think I'm going to enjoy our lessons together. There's so much I want to learn about the universe beyond magical theory and combat training. As the night progressed and the prince's condition continued to improve, Marcus found himself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought him to this moment. He had come to the Draconic Empire as an undercover researcher, expecting to spend years quietly gathering information. Instead, he had become part of the imperial household and possibly helped to change the course of interspecies relations. The antibiotic treatment continued to work exactly as predicted. Within hours, the parasite count had dropped to negligible levels, and the prince's natural healing processes were beginning to restore his strength. His fever broke completely, his breathing normalized, and color began to return to his pale scales. More importantly, the young prince's attitude seemed completely transformed. Instead of the listless, suffering child Marcus had observed from a distance, Zephyros was now alert, curious, and eager to learn about the treatment that had saved him. "Dr. Chen," the prince asked during one of his lucid periods, "these parasites that infected me, could they threaten other species as well?" Marcus nodded seriously. "That's one of my major concerns, Your Highness. The parasites seem to be attracted to magical energy, but they could potentially adapt to feed on other forms of life force. We need to develop rapid detection methods and treatment protocols to prevent a larger outbreak." The prince's eyes lit up with interest. "Could we study them? I mean, safely, of course. Understanding how they work might help us protect other worlds." Marcus was impressed by the young dragon's immediate grasp of the broader implications. "That's exactly what I hope to do, Your Highness. With your father's permission, I'd like to establish a biological research facility where we can safely study these and other organisms that might pose threats to the Empire." Emperor Vorthak, who had been listening to their conversation, stepped forward. "Dr. Chen, you have my full authorization to establish whatever research facilities you deem necessary. The security of the Empire depends on our ability to defend against all forms of threats, biological as well as military." As dawn approached on Pyros Prime, casting crimson light through the medical wing's crystal windows, Marcus realized that his life had been completely transformed. The scared, fevered child he had risked everything to save was now an eager student, curious about the biological sciences that had saved his life. The emperor, who had threatened to execute him for espionage, had become his patron and protector. The imperial medical system that had viewed him as an ignorant alien was now eager to learn from his expertise. But perhaps most importantly, the barriers between species that had seemed insurmountable were beginning to crumble. The treatment of Prince Zephyros had demonstrated that cooperation and shared knowledge could achieve what force and tradition could not. As Marcus prepared to begin his new role as Chief of Biological Sciences and tutor to the Imperial heir, he couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the most extraordinary adventures began with the simplest act of compassion. A healer's refusal to let a child suffer when he possessed the knowledge to help. The weak, fevered child who had been overlooked by his own people's medicine was about to become the catalyst for a new era of cooperation between humans and dragons. And the humble custodian who had saved him was about to help reshape the medical practices of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. 3 months had passed since the night Marcus saved Prince Zephyros's life, and the imperial palace had become a very different place. The sterile medical wing now hummed with activity as draconic healers worked alongside human medical specialists who had arrived from the Terran Federation. The new biological research center occupied an entire tower of the palace complex, its laboratories equipped with the most advanced equipment from both civilizations. Marcus stood in his office, reviewing reports from research teams scattered across the empire. The parasite that had nearly killed the prince had been identified on 17 different worlds, always attacking individuals with strong magical abilities. What they had discovered was even more alarming than the original infection. "Dr. Chen," came a familiar voice from the doorway. Prince Zephyros entered, moving with renewed energy and strength. His silver scales had regained their luster, though he remained smaller and more delicate than his brothers. More importantly, his eyes sparkled with an intelligence and enthusiasm that had captured the attention of scholars throughout the empire. "Your Highness?" Marcus smiled, setting aside his reports. "How did the examination go?" The prince's face lit up with excitement. "Dr. Nexus says my magical abilities are returning ahead of schedule. I managed to maintain a flame for 30 seconds today." and I could feel the energy flowing through me like it used to. But that's not why I'm here. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Oh? I've been analyzing the data from the biological surveys of the outer systems, Zephyros continued, moving to Marcus's desk with the confident stride of someone half his age shouldn't possess. The pattern of parasite infections isn't random. They're following trade routes, specifically routes that connect to systems where magical species are known to live. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He had suspected something similar, but hearing it confirmed by the prince's analytical mind gave it new weight. You think someone is deliberately spreading them? I think someone is using them as weapons, Zephyros replied grimly. Look at this. He activated a holographic display showing a star map of the Empire's territory. Red dots marked confirmed parasite infections, while blue lines showed major trade routes. The pattern was unmistakable. The infections were spreading systematically from one magical world to another, always arriving just ahead of Imperial expansion into new sectors. Your Highness, Marcus said carefully, if you're right about this, it means we're dealing with an intelligence that understands both draconic biology and Imperial expansion patterns. That narrows down the possibilities considerably. The Synthesis Collective, Zephyros said quietly, naming the Empire's most persistent enemy. They've always been jealous of our magical abilities. They rely purely on technology and view magic as an unfair advantage. Marcus nodded grimly. The Synthesis Collective was a federation of cybernetically enhanced species that had been at odds with the Draconic Empire for centuries. Their philosophy viewed biological evolution and magical development as inferior to technological advancement. But how would they have developed these parasites? Marcus wondered aloud. The organisms are incredibly sophisticated, perfectly designed to target magical energy. That level of biological engineering is beyond what we've seen from the collective. Prince Zephyros was quiet for a moment, his expression troubled. Dr. Chen, what if they didn't develop them? What if they found them somewhere? Before Marcus could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the palace complex. His communication device chimed with an emergency message from Dr. Nexus. Dr. Chen, report to the Emperor's chambers immediately. We have a situation. Marcus and the prince hurried through the palace corridors, finding the normally calm environment in a state of controlled chaos. Guards were moving to defensive positions, and government officials were rushing between offices with urgent dispatches. They arrived at the Emperor's chambers to find a war council in session. Emperor Vorthak stood before a massive tactical display, surrounded by his military advisors and intelligence chiefs. General Kazarak was speaking as they entered. Confirmed attacks on 7 more worlds in the past week. Each time the pattern is the same. Biological weapons target magical individuals, weakening planetary defenses before the main assault begins. Emperor Vorthak's eyes blazed with controlled fury. They use our own nature against us. Our strongest warriors become their greatest weakness. Your Majesty, Marcus interrupted respectfully, Prince Zephyros has made some important discoveries about the pattern of infections. The Emperor turned to his youngest son with obvious pride. Since his recovery, Zephyros had thrown himself into scientific study with an enthusiasm that impressed even his father. What have you learned, my son? The prince stepped forward, activating the portable holographic projector Marcus had taught him to use. The parasite infections are following a deliberate pattern, Father. They're not random biological contamination. They're strategic biological warfare designed to weaken our magical capabilities before military assault. General Kazarak studied the displayed data with growing alarm. If this is true, we need to fundamentally change our defensive strategies. We can't rely on magical shields and energy weapons if our operators are being systematically infected. There's something else, Marcus added. The biological sophistication of these parasites suggests they weren't artificially created. They show signs of natural evolution, which means they came from somewhere. If we can find their world of origin, we might be able to understand how the collective is deploying them. Emperor Vorthak's massive claws scraped against the tactical display as he considered this information. Dr. Chen, what do you need to trace these organisms back to their source? Access to the Empire's biological survey databases and permission to analyze samples from every infected world, Marcus replied. If these parasites evolved naturally, they'll have genetic markers that can tell us about their home environment. You have whatever you require, the Emperor declared. General Kazarak, I want every available ship protecting our core worlds while Dr. Chen conducts his investigation. If we can identify the source of these weapons, perhaps we can neutralize the threat. As the War Council dispersed to implement emergency defensive measures, Prince Zephyros approached his father with unusual formality. Father, I request permission to accompany Dr. Chen on his investigation. The Emperor's expression shifted to one of protective concern. Absolutely not. You've only recently recovered from one encounter with these parasites. I will not risk losing you to another. With respect, Father, I'm the only member of our family who has survived a full parasitic infection. My experience could be crucial to understanding how they work. Besides, my magical abilities are still limited. I'm probably less susceptible to reinfection than anyone else here. Marcus watched this exchange with growing appreciation for the young prince's courage and intelligence. Zephyros was right. His unique experience could be invaluable, and his reduced magical signature might actually protect him from the parasites. Emperor Vorthak was clearly torn between his protective instincts and his recognition of his son's valid points. The investigation will take you to potentially infected worlds. The risks are acceptable compared to the risk of the Empire falling to biological warfare, Zephyros interrupted gently. Father, you taught me that leadership means taking calculated risks for the greater good. This is such a risk. After a long moment, the Emperor nodded reluctantly. Very well, but you will travel with a full medical support team, and at the first sign of infection, you will return to the palace immediately. Agreed, the prince replied with obvious satisfaction. 3 days later, Marcus and Prince Zephyros departed Pyros Prime aboard the research vessel Healer's Quest, accompanied by a team of the Empire's best biological scientists and a medical staff equipped to handle parasitic infections. Their mission was ambitious: trace the biological weapons back to their source and develop countermeasures that could protect the Empire's magical populations. Their first stop was Crystalla 7, a mining world where the parasites had first appeared 6 months earlier. The planet's surface was scarred by massive excavation operations, its crystal formations providing raw materials for Imperial technology. The initial outbreak occurred in the magical crystal mines, explained Dr. Vex, the local medical chief, as their shuttle descended toward the planetary surface. The miners who worked deepest in the cavern systems were the first to become infected. By the time we identified the cause, the parasites had spread to the general population. Marcus surveyed the industrial landscape through the shuttle's windows, his mind already working on possible explanations. Dr. Vex, were any new sections of the cavern system opened in the months before the outbreak? Actually, yes, Dr. Vex replied, consulting his files. The miners broke through into a previously sealed chamber about 3 weeks before the first infections. They found it filled with some kind of crystalline formation we'd never seen before. Prince Zephyros leaned forward with interest. What happened to those crystals? They were shipped to the Imperial Research Institute for analysis, Dr. Vex said. But the transport ship never arrived at its destination. It was lost in a collective raid on the shipping lanes. Marcus and Zephyros exchanged meaningful glances. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. Dr. Vex, Marcus said carefully, I'd like to examine that sealed chamber, and we'll need to review all medical records from the infected miners. Their examination of the underground chamber revealed fascinating and disturbing evidence. The crystalline formations that had been removed showed signs of having contained biological material for thousands of years. More importantly, the chamber itself bore markings that suggested it had been artificially sealed, not naturally closed. Someone buried these parasites deliberately, Prince Zephyros observed, studying the ancient seal markers with equipment that would have been impossible for him to use before his recovery. The question is whether they were trying to contain them or preserve them. Marcus was analyzing samples from the chamber walls when his scanners detected something unexpected. "Your Highness, look at this. These biological traces aren't just from the parasites. There are genetic fragments from multiple species here, including some that match the cybernetic implant technology used by the Collective." The implications were staggering. If the Synthesis Collective had been searching for biological weapons in ancient sealed chambers, it suggested a level of long-term planning that went far beyond anything the Empire had suspected. Their investigation continued across 7 more worlds, each revealing similar patterns. Ancient chambers broken open just before parasite outbreaks, mysterious raids by collective forces, and shipping containers that never reached their destinations. But it was on the mining world of Pharos Prime that they made their most important discovery. The planet's mining operations had uncovered an entire complex of sealed chambers, dating back to an era before recorded history. Unlike the other sites, this one had been discovered only recently, and the miners had been wise enough to contact Imperial scientists before breaking the seals. "Dr. Chen," said Dr. Korath, the senior archaeologist on site, "you need to see this. We found something that changes everything." The underground complex was vast, clearly the product of an advanced civilization that had vanished millennia before the rise of either the Draconic Empire or the Synthesis Collective. But most remarkable were the detailed records they had left behind, carved in crystal formations that had preserved perfectly over time. Prince Zephyros, whose recovery had enhanced rather than diminished his intellectual capabilities, was the first to decipher the ancient writing system. "Dr. Chen," he called excitedly from one of the chamber walls, "these are biological warfare protocols. The civilization that built this place was fighting a war against something they called the Machine Plague." Marcus joined him at the wall, studying the intricate carvings. As the prince translated, a horrifying picture emerged. The ancient civilization had been fighting a war against cybernetic entities that sounds remarkably similar to the modern Synthesis Collective. In desperation, they had developed biological weapons, including the parasites that were now threatening the Empire. They created these organisms specifically to target technological implants and artificial life systems, Zephyros continued reading. But the weapons were too powerful. They started affecting all forms of organized energy, including magical abilities. So they sealed them away, Marcus realized. But somehow the Collective found this place and others like it. They've been deliberately releasing ancient biological weapons, not realizing that they target magical energy as well as technology. The discovery changed everything. The parasites weren't just weapons being used against the Empire. They were weapons that would ultimately destroy the Collective as well. Any civilization that relied heavily on organized energy systems would eventually fall victim to them. "We have to warn them," Prince Zephyros said quietly. "The Collective doesn't understand what they've unleashed." Marcus stared at the young prince in amazement. "Your Highness, they've been using these weapons to attack your people, your empire. You want to warn them?" "I want to save everyone," Zephyros replied with conviction that belied his age. "If these parasites continue to spread, they won't stop at the boundaries between our civilizations. They'll consume every form of organized energy in the galaxy." As they prepared to return to Imperial space with their findings, Marcus reflected on the remarkable transformation he had witnessed in Prince Zephyros. The weak, fevered child he had saved had become not just a capable scientist, but a leader whose vision extended far beyond the traditional boundaries of Imperial thinking. The journey back to Pyros Prime gave them time to develop a comprehensive plan. The parasites could be defeated, but only through cooperation between traditional enemies. The Empire's magical techniques could neutralize the organisms, while the collective's technological expertise could help track and contain outbreaks. "Father won't like this," Zephyros admitted as they approached the palace. "Asking him to share medical secrets with the collective will challenge everything he believes about Imperial security." "Your Highness," Marcus replied, "sometimes the greatest leaders are those who can see beyond immediate conflicts to address existential threats. Your father has already shown remarkable wisdom in accepting medical techniques from outside draconic tradition." The war council that convened upon their return was unlike any in Imperial history. Marcus and Prince Zephyros presented their findings to an assembly that included not only military leaders, but also scientists, historians, and diplomatic advisors. Emperor Vorthak listened in grave silence as his son detailed their discoveries. The ancient biological warfare complex, the true nature of the parasites, and the threat they posed to all technologically advanced civilizations. "You're asking me to reveal military medical secrets to our greatest enemies," the Emperor said finally. "To trust that they will cooperate rather than simply using our knowledge against us." Prince Zephyros stepped forward, his bearing showing a confidence that had grown tremendously since his recovery. "Father, I'm asking you to save the galaxy. If we don't act, these parasites will eventually consume every civilization that depends on organized energy. The collective, the Federation, even species we haven't met yet, all of them will fall." General Kazarak, who had initially opposed the prince as a weak heir, now spoke in his support. "Your Majesty, the prince's strategic analysis has proven accurate at every step of this investigation. If he believes cooperation is necessary, perhaps we should consider it." Marcus added his own perspective. "Your Majesty, as a physician, I can tell you that some diseases require treatments that seem worse than the illness, but the alternative to cooperation isn't victory, it's mutual extinction." Emperor Vorthak was quiet for several long minutes, his massive form still as he weighed the implications of what was being asked. Finally, he spoke. "Dr. Chen, you will prepare a comprehensive medical briefing on parasite detection and treatment protocols. Prince Zephyros, you will work with our diplomatic corps to establish communication channels with collective leadership. General Kazarak, you will develop security protocols for any joint operations." The Emperor paused, his voice taking on the formal tone of imperial decree. "Let it be known throughout the Empire that we face a threat that transcends our traditional conflicts. The survival of our civilization, and all others, requires us to act with wisdom rather than pride." The negotiations that followed were complex and delicate. The Synthesis Collective initially refused to believe that their biological weapons posed a threat to their own technological systems. It took the arrival of parasite outbreaks in collective space to convince them of the seriousness of the situation. But once convinced, the cooperation that developed exceeded everyone's expectations. Collective scientists provided technological analysis that helped understand the parasite's life cycle, while Imperial healers shared magical techniques for neutralizing the organisms. Prince Zephyros emerged as a natural liaison between the two civilizations. His unique experience as a survivor of parasitic infection, combined with his growing reputation as a scientist and strategist, gave him credibility with both sides. More importantly, his vision of cooperation based on shared survival rather than political advantage resonated with leaders who were tired of endless conflict. The joint medical initiatives developed over the following months saved thousands of lives across both civilizations. Rapid detection protocols prevented outbreaks from spreading, while combined treatment methods proved more effective than either magical or technological approaches alone. As Marcus watched Prince Zephyros address a gathering of scientists from across the galaxy, he marveled at the transformation that had begun with a simple act of medical intervention. The weak child, who had been overlooked by his own people's medicine, had become a leader whose influence extended far beyond the boundaries of any single empire. "Dr. Chen," the prince said after his speech, finding Marcus in the crowd of delegates, "I wanted to thank you again. Not just for saving my life, but for showing me that the most important strength doesn't come from magic or technology. It comes from understanding and compassion." Marcus smiled, remembering the fevered child he had first encountered in the palace medical wing. "Your Highness, I think you would have discovered that truth eventually, with or without my help. Sometimes the greatest gifts come from our greatest challenges." The biological crisis had passed, but its impact on galactic civilization would continue for generations. The cooperation between the Draconic Empire and the Synthesis Collective evolved into a broader alliance that included dozens of species working together to address common threats. Prince Zephyros, no longer seen as the weak heir, but as a visionary leader, was formally designated as the Empire's chief diplomat for interspecies relations. His unique combination of scientific knowledge, political wisdom, and genuine compassion made him ideally suited for the role. As for Marcus, his position as Chief of Biological Sciences had expanded into something much larger. The joint research initiatives had grown into a galactic medical network that shared knowledge and resources across species barriers. Standing on the observation deck of the new Interspecies Medical Research Station, watching ships from dozens of civilizations working together in harmony, Marcus reflected on the chain of events that had brought them to this moment. It had all started with a simple choice: a healer's refusal to let a child suffer when he possessed the knowledge to help. That choice had saved not just one life, but potentially millions of lives across the galaxy. The weak, fevered child who had been overlooked by traditional medicine had become the catalyst for the greatest cooperative effort in galactic history. And the humble custodian who had saved him had helped prove that sometimes the most profound changes began with the smallest acts of courage and compassion. In the end, humanity's gift to the galaxy wasn't superior technology or devastating weapons. It was the simple but revolutionary idea that cooperation could achieve what conflict could not, that understanding could bridge any divide, and that the strength to heal was greater than the power to destroy. Prince Zephyros, now a leader whose influence spanned star systems, carried that lesson forward as he worked to build a future where no child would suffer alone from diseases that could be cured, where no species would face extinction from threats that could be defeated through cooperation. The Dragon Emperor's weak child had indeed been overlooked, until a human custodian saved him and, in doing so, helped save the galaxy itself.